in the back.
Just one nuance on calling your lawyer. If you have cyber insurance, which everyone obviously should have, you may have different lawyers according to your cyber insurance policy.
This is true. So usually, I will tell you that the second call is if you have a policy, that's the next one. Your general counsel may be the one initiating that communication while you're focused elsewhere, but yes, and if there are other counsel assigned, yeah, but all of your attorneys should be coordinating each other. I mean, that's another mistake that is frequently made is, well, this is my general counsel, and then these are the lawyers assigned by my insurance company, and they don't speak. Big problem. Big problem. They should always be coordinating, even if your general counsel's not doing anything, just keeping an eye on the situation, because keep in mind your general counsel has a better understanding of the lay of the land outside of just this one issue, right? So, but yes, absolutely.
Carriers, and that's a great point, and we run into this all the time, is that carriers usually have or will have counsel that they vetted out. So a lot of times you'll say, the counsel's there to represent the carrier. However, they've been vetted out. So I would also stress to everybody, and a great point is everyone probably does or should have cyber insurance as part of their overall risk mitigation tools that are out there, is that you could talk to your broker about looking to have the counsel that works with you right now to be vetted by that carrier that you have, so that the costs will be included as part of your policy, God forbid there's any kind of event or breach out there.
That's a great point. Thank you, Rob. Barbara, did you want to elaborate on your question from earlier?
Sure. Well, you already answered funding. There is none. I didn't know if there was a group that has gotten together from corporate America, such as yourselves, to address the state, to see what they can do, because just coming from districts on our own, there's no voice. BOCES does try, but what can we do to be smarter about getting these fundings, or at least remove our funds out of the 2% tax cap for this type of initiative? Have you heard any groups doing any of that? No. Okay. Very happy to hear, Superintendent, that you recognize that it's everyone's responsibilities, not just IT, so thank you very much. From the part-time person that only comes in once a year and opens an old email and clicks, that's a real issue. So my question is, the fellow from Gercio, do you have these meetings at this message at superintendent meetings? Meaning, when the superintendents get together, have you done presentations regarding what you're talking about today?
I'm not gonna, let me say this, I don't want to speak for what other people may or may not say within my firm, but my understanding is yes, this is always, anytime this topic comes up, this is what needs to be talked about and what is talked about. Now, some of that may change based on what the particulars are of the people in the room, but yeah, the message is always the same, which is...
Could you speak a little bit louder?
Sure. This is always a top-down and bottom-up issue. Everyone has to be involved, and it's something we've talked about, I know not just at my firm, but other firms. Talk about this with the districts that they represent as frequently as the issue comes up, and it's been something that law firms have been proactive about talking to their clients about, because this is not something that you want to just, well, let's put this back here. It's not a back burner item, this is a front burner item all the time.
But at the superintendent's meetings, do you guys talk about it? Because at tech director's meeting, we talk about it all the time. So you're singing to the choir there.
Yeah, so up in Albany, we have a legislative group and an advocacy around cybersecurity and support. This is another unfunded mandate, as we call in our system. But what's interesting, and I think it's the embarrassment around districts when there is a cyber attack, that there's not an openness. My very first question is always to my tech director, what happened there? Are we vulnerable? Could you find out more information? And I have to tell you, depending on the district, that information is hard to get. The scariest meeting I was in was with a BOCES tech who worked in several districts and said, I knew that was coming because I was in that district, saw something, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they didn't listen to the part-time person that was coming in, doing some work, and realizing that they were as vulnerable as they were. But I have to tell you, I really think we have to get past that. It's an embarrassment and get more with what Joe's been saying. It's not who, it's when. I'm going to misquote you every single time on that one. Everyone but Plainview will bet me.
It's not if, it's when.
It's not if,
Yeah.
it's when, and we have to actually create those opportunities, and not just among tech directors. NYSBA should be talking about this, NYSCUS, that's the New York State's Council of Superintendents, and actually, NATCO and the Suffolk County counterpart, which is the Curriculum and Instruction Assistant Superintendents. They're probably the biggest open source because they bring in so many outside vendors for their different areas of discipline. You know, this tool for that tool for this one. So really, it should be a comprehensive conversation going on.
And getting back to your question, Barbara, about the education, I know you asked Matt, many of the panel members here, I think we first met in Albany at the first annual RIC 1 conference, where several of our panel members and myself were there to help educate attendees in Albany. So there's a lot of education, but you do need to reach out for it, because it's very difficult for anyone sitting on this panel to get to you, as it should be. But you know, if you're interested in the information, if you're interested in the entire panel coming to meet with your board or your district, that can be easily arranged, and the education is there. Joe, question in the back?
So this first item is not meant to scare you. Back in 2019, JP Morgan Chase's head, Jamie Dimon, reported they spent $500 million plus and 3,000 employees solely on cybersecurity. That year, they were attacked successfully. So we as a district on Long Island aren't going to spend that much money. There's a movement out there because districts, and one recent one is with Dropbox. They were successfully had a small attack. Everything was up to date. It was a 0-day issue. They couldn't have prevented it. It was something that was done. So how can a school district or a company be responsible for a product that the vendor had an issue with that they didn't even know? So we're talking about our school district with 3 and 4 and 5 people protecting everything. We need the state to help us and provide funding and to vet these companies instead of, like you said, the 47 school districts individually vetting the same company we're all using. Why are we doing that? That is a waste of resources. We need to work together as a team to help each other, because other than that, it's a losing battle, period,
And
end of
it's
story.
not a one-time vetting. You
It's
understand?
every year.
We're about to take on a company right now, and I know other districts use this company, but I'm wondering, they were vetted several years ago by BOCES. Does BOCES go back now and vet them again? Have you maintained that level of security?
And we pay 10 to 15% for them to do that.
Correct.
It's like that kind of
So we call that the VIG. However, it is an expense-driven aid that you know we get it on the back end next year.
So one of the things we talk about, like I've done vendor management probably for about 15, 20 years now, and I think one of the things we always try to do whenever we go to school districts, we say every year, every vendor you have to make sure that you re-vet them. You have to re-risk rank them, because everyone's going to be different. And I know you say how you're going to do it, how you have time to do that. Oh yeah, exactly. Sorry, yes. Yes, right. So this should be done every year on every vendor, and every vendor should have, if they're an online vendor, they have a cloud vendor, they should have a SOC 2 report, at least have an audit firm come and do them. For those who say, oh, I'm not going to do it, you know what? I get sometimes they're a sole source vendor, there's nothing else to do, but we have to get tough with those vendors. I mean, seriously, if they're not meeting their SLAs, then you take the money from them. Don't pay them. They're not meeting their SLAs. They're not meeting their contract requirements. I've done that with bigger companies too, and I know it's easier said than done, but
And they
it's
send a
doable.
100-page report with their flaws on page 74,
Right.
and we have 300 companies we deal with.
Right.
And then the attorney says, well, you didn't know what you should have. Are you kidding me?
I
Are
don't
you
understand.
kidding me?
Yeah.
That's the truth. That's why we pay BOCES to do this.
Right.
That's their job.
But again, just to applaud my colleague on his observation and to emphasize that,
Connecticut does it right. It's not like you have to go across the world to see if anyone's figured this out. They centrally vet all software.
Yeah.
I really wish we could, as a collaborative, send that message to New York.
Let's do that. Collaborative.
Let me explain something about that though. Connecticut doesn't vet them. They apply, they register on the site,
Right.
and then by registering, they're saying we're compliant.
So we could be a little bit better than Connecticut.
Exactly.
So I think we should.
So that's number one.
Very good.
Connecticut's not vetting. Second, I work for RICs and BOCES. One of the biggest concerns all the RICs have is vendor management. Because honestly, no one, as educational agencies, we're not cybersecurity auditors. We don't have the training or the power to vet these vendors. We wish we did. So the big question for us right now, and it's a big part of the RIC initiatives for the RIC tech plans this year, is how do we manage these vendors? What are we allowed to vet them on? How can we even audit them? Right now, because of the way EdLaw 2D is structured, all they have to do is sign a piece of paper. Now, that is a legal document that they're committing to, but there's no guarantee, such as we've seen with some of the vendors like Illuminate, that they're actually adhering to it. So the RICs really do want guidance as to what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to ask for, what we're not allowed to ask for, because we really don't know where to start. Because we're not an auditing agency. We are in the business of education, like you said, that's our business. So how can we do that other than making them adhere to it legally right now?
David, you mentioned you are AAA NAID certified. What does that actually mean, and what are you held to each year? Are you recertified? How does that work?
Yeah, so NAID is the National Association of Information Destruction, and they're a certifying body. The initial certification was rigorous. It took us months and months, and as a small company, trying to do business, we had to put a lot of effort into it, but it's worthwhile. Because honestly, we do it the right way, and we want everybody in the industry to also do it the right way. One thing we like to joke about is we have to take an exam on how to properly handle data. And I took the exam, I got a few wrong, and it was a little embarrassing. But we look back, and our requirements inside of Hauppauge were greater than even what NAID required, and that's why we got the questions wrong. So I felt a little better about it. But we're constantly under the eye of NAID. NAID can pop in at any time to look at our facility to make sure we're doing what we say we're doing. They can audit our procedures, like they could be popping in there right now for all I know. They will follow trucks and vans and people out on pickups to make sure that they're properly handling the devices in a secure way. And if you're not, you can fail. You can become decertified. So it's a very rigorous and ongoing process. When we got certified, I know the auditor planned on hitting the other 7 companies that are NAID certified in paper shredding and other areas to do various audits on them. So finding a good organization that certifies companies and relying on their certification would be a good first step because you know that it's being done the right way then.
Thank you, David. Joe, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Laura, I totally get the frustration on this. Again, doing vendor management for so many years, I think we need to change the mindset is that you're in control, you're paying the bills, right? The vendors seem to think like, oh, you'll still pay the bills no matter what. No, for every one vendor, even if there's there's got to be more than one. There is always more than one vendor that does what they do that actually has security controls in place or should have security controls in place. With New York State EdLaw 2D and Part 121, they have to now have some kind of security in place to protect the data. And if they're not going to do it, then again, they're not meeting the service level agreement. They either not get paid or you go out and find another vendor. I mean, we have to have that mindset where they are not in control of what the education industry does.
And we do, but it's so much easier. You can't let's say your student management system isn't adhering to the requirements. You can't just switch your student management system. That implementation takes years. It's very difficult for school districts to pivot that quickly, depending on what the product is. And the other issue they have is IEPs. Okay, if you have a mandated software program on IEP and they're a very small company, they don't even have a legal department, they can't even sign your agreement, do you not provide that support to the child? It's so much more complex for educational agencies than just money or switching. So that's why there's so much frustration, because there's so many other regulations that they're adhering to, and making a big swing by adopting a whole new product when you're embedded in something, it's not an easy decision.
No, I agree. And what you want to do is you want to reduce the amount of companies that don't have the security controls in place. So you're monitoring every single one.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the point here. So you're not going to ever get 100%. But at least if you instead of having to monitor 25%, you're only monitoring 5%, I think that's a win. If you want me to ever come and help you, I'll come help you. Don't worry. I have no fear of these vendors.
Joe, did you have something to add to that?
I second that. It's almost impossible. It takes years long to switch some of our main products, like our SIS or something like that. Second, I think something I've been pushing with the state is to have a master list of things they've known been breached. Instead of getting that email, Illuminate came to me on a Friday at 6 p.m. Okay? Which one the state tends to send emails to about things, but we'll talk about that later. Right, all the time, on a holiday weekend.
There's a difference, and is this hard tug of war between what the law says and what you have to do to make your business run. Okay, and here we're talking about a school district, and the practical effect of what's happening, right? Because on one side I'm dealing with a couple of employees that say, I can't work unless I do this. Now they're wrong, but getting them to understand that they're wrong is a really hard part of this, right? And making sure I'm complying. It's a continuum. It's not a hard yes or no. This is a continuum. What you need to do is get yourself into a position where you are in a position to say, I'm doing what I can. I can't account for this one end user who just won't listen. And they just won't do what I'm telling them to do. And here's all the times I told them not to do this, and they did it anyway. From my perspective right now, I go back to I'm in litigation, and I hand off to whoever's deciding, well, we told this end user once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, don't do this. We did it in writing. We counseled this person, we disciplined this person, we did all these things, and they still did it.
And let a person be held accountable in the school district.
Yeah, just like you would, with the security of a building. You would see a teacher maybe chalk a door open once. You have to counsel them. You have to go for some disciplinary practices. So if you're constantly telling the same person, you left the Wi-Fi, you did your work at home. We see that you downloaded your roster onto your home computer. They have to be written up. And you have to keep communicating to folks that these were the steps you have taken, because when it does happen, at least the community has been regularly updated on what you've done to maintain, which includes holding folks accountable for the processes and procedures you've put in place to keep the district's data safe.
There's a legal part of that, and then there's the other piece that Dr. Amir just said, right? There's the, how do I communicate this message out to my community, right? I don't want to be the one that didn't bother to say anything to this employee who just won't listen. No, we did X, Y, and Z, and now it may be time for discipline. I think as we go over the next few years, you're going to start seeing, we're going to go through the disciplinary charge process, which I like, because that creates work for me, right? Right, the business part of me goes, hey, more work, right? But the reality is, it is invariably, whenever I have cases where the employer didn't bother to do anything, they didn't counsel, they didn't write up, they didn't do anything, that's where I struggle. Those are always the cases I find difficult, because I can't back up what I'm saying. This person's a risk. But you know what I can do now is, if we do have that record, I can walk in and say, we're in a disciplinary hearing, and I say, this person's got to go. This person is a security risk.
Security risk,
right? Hey, if a hearing officer wants to tell me, well, I'm going to keep them there. Okay, but from the back end, right, the public perception part of that, I did everything I could. I put this person into a hearing, tried to get rid of them. This is somebody else telling me now. But now I'm going to do all sorts of things to make this difficult.
Thank you.
To make sure. So.
Thank you, Matt. Jay?
So I had a question in regard to end users and all the different things that we kind of talk about. We're always talking about paid software. What about the free software? I click all the way through, with COVID freebies, as we used to call it,
Nothing's free.
But that was problematic. We had so many teachers that were working from home from March to June that downloaded all of that. So the first thing one of our tasks for our new tech director was to find out everything that was being used, all the free sites, and it was exorbitant. And then we were fair. We vetted those products and said how much is needed for us to take on and purchase and go through the EdLaw 2D work that we do to bring it on as an acceptable vendor. But it was exorbitant, the amount of stuff people were using.
And then just going back to what Joe was saying, if it was possible to get those free vendors on that, vetted list, then maybe in the future they can charge for their services, and maybe it'll actually help them. So, having that conversation with the vendors and saying, we're trying to help you get into the BOCES, get into the RICS, get into whatever it is, but you have to get through that process first, I think is a really good step.
The Erie One BOCES has contract consortiums, which are the closest thing we have to a state list. They do have a free RFP for free software products, and there are several that participate in that free RFP, and your BOCES can provide an opt-in agreement if you are using those free products in your districts. But that's as close as it gets. One thing, we love Lynette Attai from Playwell LLC, and she works with student data privacy, and she's written a few books, so we're gonna just dig her. She always says, free software, if you can't find a person, there's no one to talk to, there's no one you can ask a question of, then you shouldn't use it.
Right.
At the same time, EdLaw 2D, in the current CPO for New York State Ed, recognizes this. It shouldn't impede instruction. I used to always be a no person. No, you can't use it. No, you can't use it. But it shouldn't impede instruction. If it's necessary to provide instruction, if it's enhancing the curriculum, if it's designated on an IEP, you don't have to say no immediately. You want to be careful, you want to assess risk, but free software products, if there's something else you have that does the same thing, don't use it. If there's no one to talk to, don't use it.
How is that information communicated to the end user? So, we're doing our own software audit. We're doing our own, everybody, our tech directors, we do our own software audits to a certain extent, but now the heat's really on, right? To really drill down to this, you're using just this one extension, why? So we're going down there. How do we get, other than just putting a message out to the staff, you can't just use whatever you want anymore, is there another way that you're communicating with the staff? How are you communicating with your internal staff to say, sorry, all bets are off, you cannot download whatever you want whenever you want at home, you cannot download the roster onto your home computer at 10 o'clock at night when you're trying to figure something out? How is that message, in a positive way, getting out there?
I'm going to pass you over to our new guy.
So,
You have to slow it down, though. The first thing, very similar to school safety, you're never going to stop a school shooter who's absolutely adamant in getting in.
Right.
But what you want to do is slow it down. So Alex, how do we slow it down?
He's not that new.
over to you. What else I can do anyway? I'm doing a roadshow. I'm visiting every single building, meeting with all faculty, and for those that are not in those meetings, I, during our superintendent's conference day, held a webinar for all of our clerical staff, and we're going to get to everybody, and I'm putting them on notice that while maybe we haven't cranked down on everything yet, it's coming, and we're going to start collecting that information, and if we don't have something that, if your product doesn't meet our needs, we'll try to find an alternative, but if it doesn't work, we have to shut it down. We've already put in Azure and Google approval, so if somebody tries to click on, you can sign in using this app, it comes to me, and I get a notice, and I'll look at it. I'll send them an email back and say, no, you can't do it this way, you got to do it this way.
But it's actually that personal touch of going around, and just one brag on it. When Alex came and we started doing phishing campaigns, at the end of the year last year, we had 12% of our faculty fall for it, which had me up every single night throughout the summer. Because he did it like the second to last day of school, and I'm like, where are those 143 people? They cannot come back to work in September. He wouldn't give me the list because he knew I was serious. But he just did one the other day. We were less than 1%. But the beautiful thing was, it was our aides. And they're the most transient population in our staff. So there were no teachers, students, or admin that fell for it. It was mostly aides, and less than 1%. So it's really the daily diligence.
Just a quick question for Matthew. Quick question for Matthew or anyone else who has an opinion on this. You talk about mitigation of risk. thinking from your perspective, I'm from a very small East End district. We've only had a tech director or a tech person at all for 2 years now. And that's a lot of districts, out on the East End. We think we're doing everything we need to be doing, but in order to, you said you want to be able to say we've done everything we can do. So at that point, where does a small district like that begin? We rely on outside consultants constantly. I have an audit background myself. Where do we begin? My inclination is with an internal audit. But then who are the best people to seek for that? Is it Serini? Is it Stetson? Is it LI Tech? Any thoughts on that? Maybe Mary, any thoughts on that from you?
Well, I would recommend any of our panelists. They're all excellent. I think the first thing understanding that you have to go outside because outside, you're looking for people who work with school districts. I've seen people looking for vendors who don't work with schools. I'm like, why? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. So yes, I would go to any of these panelists, depending on what you're looking for. But yeah, that's your first thing. I would talk to your lawyers. Sometimes some of your lawyers, and obviously my firm doesn't represent every school district in this room, so speak with your attorneys. They may have people with whom they work. That is an important part of that. And then, but if they don't, maybe they have someone else who does. Right? I deal with lawyers at other firms all the time. We're always sharing that sort of information. If there's a vendor that I really like, I'm absolutely talking with other attorneys that I work with at the other firms. Because the school law game is smaller. There's only a handful of firms. We all know each other. We all talk to each other. And particularly in this area, we're always talking with each other about things that we've seen, threats that we've seen, vendors we like, people we like to work with because they're really good. I like to work with people. A guy can be completely nice to me and treat me like gold and be terrible at his job, and I'm never going to send him business. I only care about people who are good at what they do. And so if you're going to get a referral from me, it's only going to be somebody who's really good at what they do.
Yeah, I would recommend have a conversation with any one of us and identify what area you really want to address. If you need auditors. If you feel like you want a risk assessment, go for risk assessment. If you want an IT, any one of us can really give you that information. Just have the conversation. It's free to have the conversation with us. And one-on-ones and discuss really what.
And if we're not the right, we'll refer you over to who should.
Exactly.
And one of the reasons we brought this particular panel together is because they collaborate so well and so closely with one another. They're in touch day to day. This isn't a panel who's sitting today and we'll see each other a few months from now. The conversation is ongoing and the dialogue continues.
I would also say that, as we like to say around the Takashusi household, cheap is good, free is better. And in the case of what you have here is if you have a cyber policy, for instance, the carriers provide you with some level of free services, pen testing, some basic services that you're paying for, you probably don't even know as part of that policy. So one of the first steps is, yes, an initial pen test is really not going to do too much, but it will identify some really drastic issues you may have to then talk to somebody after that. The second piece that I would say that really helps is, and a couple times it came up about school security is such a huge issue. And all of you have plans in place on how to mitigate that. The steps to take if there is an active shooter. Just like when I was little, I remember the fire drills. Everyone knew where to go when there was a fire alarm. We talk a lot about a cyber incident response plan. If you do not have one, it's easy enough to create. And that helps because the last thing you want to do is when something does happen, is to think about who needs to talk to the media. What steps do I need to take? Because you want to make sure that you have a limited amount of interruption. So that's another step to maybe take as a smaller school district is just make sure you have some sort of cyber incident response plan because it can then identify some of those areas of risk that you can then look to have outside help and ask questions about.
Thanks, Rob. And Shari?
I just want to add also there's some other language that you can introduce to people that might help them to advocate for their cause, especially if you're a small district. So, we talk about passwords. Passwords have been around for a long time, okay? It should really be passphrases. It should be a longer, multi-composite, you know, it could be a sentence. That's what I tell people, like, anything you really care about, you know, I'm like, you know, it's 16 characters long, at least for me. And people are like, how do you remember that? I'm like, it's a phrase. Think of it as a passphrase. Don't say passwords anymore. Say passphrase, something that you're really going to remember, and make it unique. Do not share or do not have the same. These are like basic concepts that you have. Disaster recovery, that was the big buzzword way, way back. Then it became disaster preparedness. You know what? It's really business continuity, and that means it's not just IT. That means it involves everybody, involves the team. And those are the kinds of conversations you want to have especially if you're a small place, because you're going to be wearing multiple hats. And how do you do that? And how do you do that on a limited budget? You still have an obligation to protect all that data. So it's really coming in and having somebody, you know, from an audit side, we're coming in to assess those risks, document those risks, and tell you where some of those other holes are. That will then tell you where else you should be going and advocating.
Thanks, Sherry. Brian?
Yes. So just real quick to touch on what Rob said, incident response plans can be very complicated. If anybody has started them, they you know, depending on your organization, there are a lot of components to take into play when you're doing them. However, my recommendation is to start where you are and get the plan, even in its basic infancy stages, in place. Even if it's just a contact tree. Once you start that process, it helps to continue to build it. If you say every quarter you're going to review it, or every year you're going to review it, the plan's going to continue to evolve. And it gives you that place to start and to continue. Because otherwise, I see too many organizations jumping into it and trying to get everything done in one shot, and it's not the right way to do it, especially when you have limited resources, which school districts do. I also see that when you have somebody that's dedicated to cybersecurity in your organization, in your district, that really helps to push the narrative down the road. That person has that capability and that desire to continue those processes to move forward, and it's really important. And in successful organizations, that person is the key to the environment succeeding in cybersecurity. I just have one question for you. When it comes to just one, when it comes to due care and due diligence in a legal aspect, if it goes to court or whatever that might be, how or where should a district know or understand where they are to determine that they've done enough due care or due diligence that could be applicable in some sort of legal?
So, I mean, I think some of what you've heard here is this concept of education, right? There's a lot of, and you just said it, like small doses, right? Small bits, one step at a time, sort of doing what you can. Everyone, anytime you're dealing with an issue relating to cybersecurity or technology, and I'm in court, right, they understand that this is not, it's not simple. So I need to show that, yeah, they understand, one, problem exists, training, right? Simple things like training, I don't have any. Well, you fail, I mean, right? You're done. I also represent a number of private sector employees, right? They don't seem to get that they have to do a yearly sexual harassment training. No matter how many times I'll tell them, and they don't do it. I said, well, great. As soon as you get sued, just be ready for the check. We'll talk about how big the check's going to be, right? Or I'm going to tell your insurance company exactly how big the check's going to need to be, and then they're going to drop you. But due diligence is a continuum too. What is the issue? What did you do to try to prevent it? So what steps did you take? Simple things like education and training. Did you do those things? Great, okay, now you've at least, step one is done. Now the next step. You also have to think about what the problem is, right? What actually happened? It is a unforeseen ransomware attack that is brand new. Well, that's gonna be different than, hey, somebody clicked on a phishing scam that, you know, they got the email from the the prince in some country that no one's ever heard of, and they clicked on it. Right? There's a difference in those two things. So the more obvious problem, well, what did you do to educate people about the phishing scams? What did you do to make it harder for them to click on those things? There's no bright line answer, but it's the basics. Did we do the basics? If you didn't do the basics, you're done. If you've done the basics, which to me is education, training, you have policies, you have procedures. Did you at least do those, or were you on the road to doing those? What are your outside consultants? That's what they're going to look at. Who do you have managing this? Oh, I have some guy that I employ that comes in 3 hours a week, and he's in charge of the entire technology for 2,000 people.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
So just real quick, just one more thing
Sure.
to add to that conversation. So if a district goes through, does the risk assessment based upon PD law, they've identified 15 risks. 4 of them are exploitable risks, and they've developed a 5-year cybersecurity plan to remediate those, because a lot of those require cultural changes, they require a lot of different things that need to happen for that to go in place. If one of those exploitation models were exploited and you were legally involved with the district for some case that was in there, is the recognition of it, I know it's not enough, but can that be used to?
Yes, the fact that you did a risk assessment, you identified this as a problem, you identified a solution or plan, and started down the road of the plan, and you got caught somewhere in the midst of doing that, yeah, that's really good. That's the kind of argument I want to be able to go in with. Because if you got exploited, chances are there was something that was out there. So you want to be able to say, I was doing what I was supposed to do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to take an opportunity. Thank you for this panel. It was incredible. I think these conversations need to be happening more often. Would you be able to share out there information? I was taking notes about everybody.
We will. We're going to, right. So that's why it's so important, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not registered at the registration table, please leave your contact information and register so that we can send you the bios and the contact information for all of our panelists today. Any other questions and answers? If not, I'm going to ask the panelists to take 1 moment each for a quick takeaway.
Quick question. So I've got 2 quick things. Number 1, I don't know if it was clear, but so I'm an IT and cybersecurity guy. You are eventually going to get breached. It's going to happen, but that doesn't mean that you can't minimize the impact. So by compartmentalizing different systems, you don't have what happened at Suffolk County where they got everything.
And that's the point of what our panelists are bringing to you today. There are ways to minimize that risk.
And I just advocate for the IT guy because I've been in both sides of it. A lot of times, and I deal with the private sector a lot, where people just assume the IT guy, the cybersecurity guy is doing all the work and implementing the system to protect the business or the school district. A lot of that has to be driven by policy, so it kind of all starts there with your risk assessment, knowing where your data is, what's, where that is, to then define what policies you need to adhere to define what security systems need to go into place to protect it.
Exactly, and I don't want to take away from Joe's final point, because I bet that was going to be it. So let's, Sherry, can you begin? What is one key takeaway that you hope everybody leaves with today?
Communication amongst a lot of different people, that it takes a village, to raise a child. It takes a number of different people in a school district to really address cybersecurity. It's not just the IT department. And working with auditors, at least from an internal audit, I can tell you, we help to advocate.
Joe?
I'm going to give 3 very quick, because then I'm on just for a short time. Number 1, any of us come in as business partners and partners with everybody here. We don't come in to embarrass you or to do anything, so if you needed our help, it's totally to help you, 100% to help. We're on your side. Number 2, thank your IT people for their short staff, and they're doing the best they can, but also ask them how you can help if you are not in IT. All right, it's your responsibility as well to help them out. And 3 points, you can either be inactive and do nothing and hope for the best, which is not the best thing to do. You could be reactive, but then it's too late. Or you could be proactive and really take this bull by the horns and really do your best to protect the district from protect the data and information for the district.
Thanks, Joe. Anthony, one key takeaway?
Pretty much everything he just said. It was really the same thing, is that you got to, proactive planning is key, all right? Find your champions within your organizations as far as who can take this ball and run with it. IT people, I know what it's like, I'm one of them. But definitely work with them and help them with the, have open communications. Start the conversation, that's the hardest part.
David?
So I would say that recycling is not data destruction. Make sure that the person or the company that's handling your data destruction is certified, doing it the right way, providing you the right reports and certifications so that you can protect yourself in the event that there ever is a breach.
And student data.
I would say ask questions. You have a lot of resources that are available to you among your counterparts as well as among some folks like ourselves. Ask questions, because bad actors out there are constantly refining their opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities. You want to do the same proactively, asking questions and refining what the things that you do have in place and that you do control, that you're constantly evolving those as well.
I would say it's everybody's job in the school community to take care of the data that we have. And if you really liken it to what you've done for school security, down to the teacher level. The biggest tragedy about Uvalde was a teacher left a door open. And I have to tell you, that one instance allowed all of us to go at the teacher level with school security, and I really believe when you show how vulnerable every user is to open up the key to the district's data, it can't all be top down. I guess that's it. It just can't all be top down.
Thank you. Matt?
I would just say, educate yourselves. That's the biggest way to help you in this regard. This is an issue with just so many nuances. You need to understand them, and you need to educate yourselves and those around you so that you can better attack the problem, be proactive about it, but work both in reality and in the non-reality that is the law. And that's education to a bunch of educators, right? But that's what you need to do, is make sure that you have to understand it. You can't attack a problem if you don't understand what the problem is. So educate yourself about what the problem is and how to go about creating a solution for yourself.
Thank you, Matt. Sherry Diamond is partner at Serini & Associates. Joseph Horowitz is the Director of Compliance and Audit with Stetson Cyber Group. Anthony Bonaspina is the CEO of Long Island Tech Advisors. David Faverio is President of Pupfish Sustainability Solutions. Rob Tokarczewski is Vice President at USI Insurance. Dr. Mary O'Meara is Superintendent, Plainview, Old Bethpage. And Matthew Maynard is Partner at Guercio & Guercio. Panelists, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for joining us. Our panelists will be here for you to answer questions before you leave if you want to grab them. And again, just leave your email address so that we can forward you their contact information as well. Thank you so much.
I was told everything you're saying is